Hey friends, it is the first of the month, and that means that my art supply budget has reset, and I have treated myself to the new Core Mini 12 half pan watercolor set of solid watercolors in a very unique tin. I have used Core watercolors before, and they used to be a staple in my palette, but right now the only one that's left in there permanently is Core's Cobalt Teal, which is my favorite Cobalt Teal. The rest of them, I didn't enjoy the way that they played with the rest of my palette. They flow very strongly, and they overtake anything you mix them with. They are just incredibly strong paints, and I think maybe the best way to work with that is to use a palette that's exclusively Core and see how they work together. So that's one reason why I picked up this palette. I've never owned 12 of these at once, and I was looking forward to seeing how they cooperated. This Core Mini tin is about ½ inch wider and ½ inch shorter than a standard 12 half pan watercolor tin. I've never owned one this size and shape. It's about the size of two Altoids tins next to each other, for those of you who measure things in Altoids tins. And it's not as wide as my old Schminke 12 half pan set. The tin has a matte black finish that allows some brushed metal to show through, and the back has the list of all of the colors, their light fastness, and the pigments used, which is very helpful, except where the light fastness appears to be NA. What does it mean? We just don't know. Once you open the tin, you'll find a lightweight cold press watercolor card to swatch. And these are listed by letter and not by the name, which I thought was a very interesting choice. It makes me wonder if Core is planning to release more of these sets with different color options. As you can see, just the act of taking this set home dinged up my mixing area just a little bit. Now these paints are in half pans. They do appear to be extruded or molded rather than hand poured. So if you're into the hand pouring kind of thing, just be aware of that. I could not detect a difference in formulation between these and just regular tube Core watercolors, as opposed to the way that Winsor & Newton says that their extruded watercolors are a different formulation than their tube watercolors. These central mixing areas are so interesting to me. This is silicone, and I've never seen anything quite like that before. It's such an interesting use for that space in the middle of the palette. And in a moment you'll see how the paint itself behaves on that. And the lid to this tin was one of the main selling points for me. I've also never seen mixing areas that look quite like this. Now Core does make larger tins for their tube sets that do have these same mixing areas on them, but I wanted the hinged version. You have just witnessed my first pet peeve with this tin. The sticker on the back is so smooth that it will just slide around my table. There's also no ring to grip it, and the tin is just a little too wide for me to comfortably hold in one hand. So an ergonomic consideration there. This tin is magnet responsive, so not actually tin at all, ha ha ha. So you could probably take out that silicone insert. I have not been able to get a fingernail underneath it. It's either very, very tight or it's glued in. And then you could use as many half pans or full pans as it will hold, which I would guess close to 30. Here is my second pet peeve with this tin. The watercolors fall out of the half pans when they're dry. Probably won't happen much after I use it more, but there is enough room in the lid because of those giant mixing areas that I love that they just go flying all over the place. There's no extra folding mixing area to keep them in place, so keep that in mind as well. For swatching, I'm using a silver black velvet small jumbo round brush. It holds a ton of water, which is great for demonstrating the flow of these paints. In the A pan, we have cadmium yellow primrose, which is the cool yellow for this set, and it is very vibrant. I was pretty astonished at how almost neon this color came out into my mixing area. So I am taking all of these from the pan to the mixing area first to see how they behave there, and then onto my card. I'm intensifying that color before I bring in some clean water for the flow part of the swatch. Next comes Nickel Azo Gold, which is my favorite color in Golden's line of acrylic paints, and I love building up the acrylic to its deeper tones, so I'm really excited to have that in watercolor form as well. Quinacridone Gold is my favorite watercolor yellow otherwise, and Nickel Azo Gold is a little bit more yellow. It's a little cooler. I'm actually kind of surprised that they're using it as a warm yellow, or I guess as a replacement for yellow ochre. And that right there is the amazing flow that I've come to expect from core watercolors. Next is Transparent Purole Orange, which is a color that I've had in my palette before. There was even a time that I tried to make it my everyday orange and just use it as orange in my palette all the time, and I found it to be way too bright for my orange. I like a burnt orange, and this is almost like a construction cone. It is the brightest orange I have ever encountered. Next up is Purole Red Medium, which is an intriguing granulating red that almost borders on coral in some lights. I gotta tell you, I was really curious about this color choice on Core's part, as well as a few others in this palette. I don't keep a pure red in my palette. I don't usually see the need for it, but I do think I'm gonna enjoy playing with this one. It also appears to be a lot less staining than the other colors in this palette. Next is Quinacridone Magenta, which I would consider a primary for this set. And if I only had 3 colors in this core set, it would be the Quinacridone Magenta, Phthalo Blue Green shade, and probably the Nickel Azo Yellow rather than the Cadmium Yellow Primrose. I really like the way the nickel mixes up. It still mixes like a cool yellow, even though it's meant to be more of a yellow ochre replacement or a warm yellow. But of course that doesn't tell you anything about Quinacridone Magenta. This color reminds me of the Quinacridone Violet I had in the M-gram watercolors. I had it very briefly because it stayed too wet in my palette all the time as it was honey based. But you can see in the dilution it actually takes on more bluish purple violet characteristics. Speaking of bluish purple, this electric lady coming out here is dioxazine purple, which has been a favorite of mine for some time. I had it in the Winsor Newton Cotman line, which was student grade, but their dioxazine purple was actually really great, and Core absolutely knocked it out of the park on this one. It gets very, very dark and full saturation, and I could even see it operating in mixes like a carbazole violet, but it still has that incredibly vibrant look to it. A through F are swatched, and now we're on to the second row. Starting with Ultramarine Blue, another palette staple for a good solid primary blue. And Core's Ultramarine is one of the strongest out there, and it delivers a really satisfying pigment load for a color that I kind of steered away from in lesser paints just because it always came out a little bit weak for me. Let's get an extreme close-up of that Core flow. As I dug into Phthalo Blue Green shade, I encountered the first round of something I was afraid of as soon as I saw how full these pans are and how far the extruded watercolor sticks out of them. Core just has so much flow that any extra paint that gets in between the palettes, I'm afraid is going to spread and contaminate other colors. Not a huge consideration between ultramarine and phthalo blue, but definitely up in my yellows. I would not want the transparent purole orange to contaminate my nickel azo yellow. So that is another consideration for this set. Not a problem that you will have if you use hand-poured paints, of course, although the Daniel Smith hand-poured paints appear to be very, very full as well. point is, I would encourage you, if you buy this set, do not spray your paints down to moisten them before you start, because they will spread if you do that and contaminate each other's half pans. But getting back to Phthalo Blue Green shade, this has a really nice shift in dilution, much like the quinacridone magenta, except for the Phthalo Blue Green shade, it shifts a little bit more to turquoise. You can see at the edges here where it's the most diluted in this mix. Now we've come to the one and only actual green in this set. Another interesting color choice, the one green is sap green, as opposed to a viridian or a phthalo green or anything like that. And this is a very mellow sap green. I enjoy it quite a lot, actually. It's not quite as acidic as other sap greens that I've tried. I think it's going to be a very solid mixer and also very pleasant on its own. Next up we have transparent brown oxide, which is a warm brown that's maybe a better orange for my money than the transparent Purell orange. I did say that I like my oranges burnt, and this is very burnt. There are just enough mixing areas in this set for every paint, and now we get to see how it behaves on that silicone. It does bead up, it does sort of puddle in a very plasticky way, but I still think it's such a unique and interesting mixing area that I kind of like it. And I'm sure that it will loosen up the same way plastic does after a little bit of use and after it gets a little bit more abraded. Transparent brown oxide appears to be a very decent substitute for burnt sienna, which is probably exactly why it's in this set. Next is burnt umber, which is a darker and more neutral brown. I'm very excited about how this one dilutes. I think it would be good for layering in portraiture with some darker skin tones. Finally, we have Payne's Gray, and I am in love with this color. It used to be a staple again in my palette, but I actually haven't had it in my palette for a while. I've been using indigo instead when I need a dark color and mixing my own Payne's Gray with indigo and an orange. This Payne's is a little bit on the blue side. It's almost a slate gray, but it's not quite as blue as, say, Daniel Smith's Payne's Blue Gray. Alright, get ready. I crossed the border of my swatch square and there's going to be a color fight. Epic, dude. Overall, I found some of these color choices to be non-standard, but a little exciting for that exact reason. I'm looking forward to playing more with them, both on their own and in mixes together. And of course the tin really drew me in. It's just not like anything else that's out on the market right now. And despite the cons and pet peeves that I listed earlier, I just really love these large mixing wells. They're so convenient and exactly what I'm looking for in a mixing area. Now, if you've watched my previous watercolor unboxing video, you know that I really like to test my paints out using images of peacocks. But the good news is I've vastly improved in my ability to render images of peacocks. This one was sketched from reference using the website Unsplash. And underneath my palette, you saw that little black card there. That is some lino grip, which is used for carving linoleum. It holds the block of linoleum in place. And I put that under my palette to keep it from sliding around when I'm in the midst of painting. So I'm starting with an underpainting of sap green in the background. And ultramarine blue in the foreground, and that ultramarine is spreading so nicely, doing exactly what I want it to do. It's almost giving it a radiant look, especially after I get plenty of layers down. This is Fabriano 140 pound hot press paper, which I bound into an art journal using the cover of Salvador Dali's autobiography, because Salvador Dali was actually kind of a douchebag. I don't mind tearing pages out of his book. While I paint, let's do some math. I'm going to source all my prices from Blick.com, where this set of half pans costs $59.99. 11 milliliter tubes of all of these colors would set you back by $132.67. The average price of each tube is $11.05, and a half pan holds 1.5 milliliters of watercolor. So it's not unreasonable to say that each half pan in this set holds $1.50 worth of watercolor. So the big question becomes, is it worth it? In essence, you're paying $18 for paints and a difference of $42 for a really neat tin that slides around a lot. I think the bigger question is, do you personally enjoy watercolors that flow like greased lightning? And do you not already have a solid mixing collection of core watercolors in particular? If you answered both of those questions with a yes, then I can highly recommend this set. Of course, the other consideration is whether all of the pet peeves that I mentioned earlier would drive you up a wall, and I did discover one more while doing this painting. Because these half pans are overfilled, and because the edges of these mixing circles aren't a particularly sharp drop-off, there was no place for me to scrape the pure color off of my paintbrush, which unfortunately means that I did waste a good amount of paint. I am going to have another video out very soon about how I actually underfill the half pans and full pans in the paint pans that I pour myself, and the reasons that I do that. So watch for that one. But of course, when I'm buying extruded paints in a set or paints that have been hand poured by someone else, I don't really have a choice in the matter. My goal with this painting was to put this set through its paces and use every single color, even if it's just in a mix. And even knowing what I knew of core from prior experience, I was overwhelmed again by how vibrant these watercolors were and how well they worked together. Likewise, my goal for this video was to not get overly technical. I didn't go into what pigments they used and so on and so forth, but I hope that this was a really effective overview that maybe will help you make your own decisions about how you want to move forward with this set or with buying individual core tubes. If you have any other questions about the core set, or you want to see me use it in a different way, please do leave me a comment. And if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more. Thanks so much for watching.